So I wanted to ask Yotam and Nelini. I don't think any of us would be here in this room thinking about revolution if it actually weren't for Occupy Wall Street. That put that concept and that possibility back into the air. You guys are down there. You're in the trenches. Can you just tell us, what Occupy Wall Street has been up to, and sort of what principles you think is guiding it in this new sort of phase? Is there going to be an Occupy Spring? And just what's going on? Because I think the perception for a lot of people is that it sort of went away, and I know that's not exactly true. So tell us what you think are the sort of really positive lights of organizing that are happening.
I'll take it back.
Okay. Well, obviously, we're just folks who are involved and not representatives of the movement, because everybody should identify themselves as Occupy as well. After the kind of like removal from the park, folks are saying, "Oh, that's the end. That's the end." But occupying a park is a tactic. And it served its course. It was a great organizing space that so many people came to, and it was a home for a lot of people. And when we lost it, it was really hard for folks. I mean, it was hard for myself, and I think ever since then, I mean, we had actions going out through the winter, and the winter, nobody likes the winter. Winter sucks, even though we haven't had that much of a winter if you're looking outside today, but I think this has been the time where folks are getting, down to organizing, getting together, because when the park was going on, and when it was nicer weather, everybody's doing thousands and thousands of things at the same time, like, oh, we got a rally right now, wait, I just was at another rally. And so I think this is the time where we've had to really think about kind of what is a strategy, and as far as for me, the stuff that I've been doing is really thinking about strategic decisions and thinking about tactics, that different tactics, and diversity of tactics has been a saying that we've all been using and throwing around right now. But I do think that there's so much still power, because there's so many occupations that are still happening. Just because we at Occupy Wall Street have gotten removed, that we don't represent the whole movement. If you see what's going on, there's still a lot of activities on the West Coast. Whether people agree with it or not, it's still happening. It's not that it's not we've died and have gone away. And I always want to remind people of, after the bus boycotts, it was 5 years before civil rights kind of like really erupted. So, and I think that's going to be completely less time. Like I think that the spring is going to be, and hopefully will be, some really large mobilization.
Can you tell us a little bit about what those meetings have been about, and what the direct actions have been about? Has it been about homes or banks, or what have you seen that's sort of really been exciting?
In the fall, or just going to the spring?
Going into the spring, yeah.
I think, well, I'm really excited about May Day. I think that
and what is that? Just
yeah, absolutely. May Day historically, we're International, Workers and Immigrant Rights Day, and in the last couple of years in the States, it's been really a large immigrant rights. In 2006, they did the Day Without the Immigrants, and it was really successful. And we're working with a bunch of people in the May Day meetings, from immigrant rights groups to labor unions to rank and file to non-affiliated. It's been really great to actually just kind of come out and like have a stance. And on the West Coast, they did call for a general strike. And we've called for a support of whatever folks would like to do. It is in the kind of like the document that passed through the General Assembly for a general strike, but also a day without the 99%, but also changing up your regular day. Don't think and do things as usual on May 1st. So it should be really exciting. I mean, it's still in the planning stages. We still got some time. I think this is been the longest time we've actually had to plan for something. Usually it's been in a week or so. So I think that with all the planning that's going on. And also, I think one of the interesting things that we've done with this whole diversity of tactics conversation is really strategizing about how to diversify messaging and so on and so forth. So for instance, I and a couple of folks who are actually in this room too have been working on some plus brigades, which is a way to think about actions and messaging in a different way, whether it be clown brigades or singing brigades, or to actually have fun instead of like violence versus nonviolence. Like, how do we have fun? So I'm excited about that, like, fun element that's going to happen in the spring.
Yotam.
Yeah, okay. I really wanted her to go first because I feel like it's really hard to answer the question of what the hell are you all doing right now. Part of it is because we don't have we don't have a central location. We don't have an occupation where people kind of like cruise through and tell each other what they're doing and all that. But also, even after a while, when the movement grew to the size that it became, the occupation wasn't that anymore either. So there never actually really was a central hub for a while. And that's like one of the things about this movement that's a blessing and a curse, that it's decentralized enough to be too hard to pin down, and that's good and bad. So it makes it hard to answer the question of what is everyone doing. But there's a lot of people in this room who are parts of working groups or are planning direct actions or are part of neighborhood assemblies that meet every week, or they went back now that it's winter to do the sort of grassroots organizing that they were doing before this even started, whether it's around housing or schools or university students, or so there's a lot of that stuff is going on. And also the fact of the matter is we're doing stuff right now that is a little bit less sexy than it was a few months ago, and that's just a reality of movement building that you have to accept, or else it's you're in the wrong place. Like, the honeymoon happens and it's awesome and it's really fun and you're like in love.
Why less sexy?
Well, that's what I'm saying is like,
how less sexy?
what I'm saying is like eventually you wake up from the honeymoon and it's like, okay, this is real life. Oh shit. And that's kind of a bummer for the first day maybe, where it's like, okay, this is not, you're not going to take me out for dinner every night. That wasn't, but it becomes, that's like something important to grapple with as an organizer, potentially as a revolutionary, as someone who wants to be part of a movement. Is reality is, if you really want a social transformation, a meaningful social transformation, that's going to take a lifetime, and it's not going to be awesome every day, and it's not going to be in public every day, and it's not going to be in the front page of the New York Times every day, and that's just something that you have to deal with, and that's something that we are dealing with right now, which is why you don't hear about it as much. A lot of people have gone back to do sort of the homework that we didn't do in the beginning. The beginning was this kind of incredible eruption that we can try to explain how that happened, but I think it's on top of a ton of grassroots organizing that's been happening for a very, very long time, before and will continue after. But there was a lot of sort of homework that we didn't do that we're going back to do now.
So what is that homework?
Sort of base building, and so growing the actual, if this is going to really be a social transformation, it needs to be a mass movement, and that's hard. That's really hard work, and it takes a million one-on-one conversations, and that's not something you're going to hear about in the news, and it's maybe not as fun to do, but that's the real thing. So there's that, and there's the internal organizing, and there's taking on particular issues like, every time there is a PEP hearing, a panel for educational policy, to shut down another set of public schools, there is an eruption of resistance around that, around a particular issue, and there's resistance around issues around housing and things like that. And so that's the kind of like sort of base building that's necessary for eruptions like the one that we had and the ones that we will hopefully have again soon to be relevant or possible or important. So that's a lot of what people are doing right now, and I think that's the vibe right now, is people are kind of like, quietly working, and this is a life now. Yeah. And we're going to see where it goes in the spring, but it's going to go somewhere. And I'm pretty confident that it's going to, I don't know if I'm going on too long, but I think I'm pretty confident that it's going to go somewhere. And I think even if this particular iteration of the movement doesn't continue and we don't call it this in a year, and it turns out that Occupy Wall Street, whatever that was, happened for a few months in the fall. I don't know exactly what's going to happen to the brand, what May Day is going to look like. I don't know about that. What I know about is the conditions that brought us here are real, and they're not going anywhere, and they're going to deepen and worsen, and they're going to truly affect people's lives in a real and material way that you cannot fake. That's one prerequisite for all of this. And another thing that I know is that there's a ton of people who are committed to a radically different society, and they're out there now in a way that they weren't out there before, and that gives us an incredible amount of confidence towards the movement building that we need to do in the future. And that is, both in the grassroots organizing that's been done that led to this, and the grassroots organizing that's happening now, and revolutions that are happening all over the world that were inspirations to this, and things like Republic Windows and Doors, which when I was a student in 2008 at the New School, that was like, holy shit, it's starting, and when we noted it then. And so it's not going to go anywhere. It might look different, and it might take a lifetime, probably will, and that's how we know it's real.
Richard, I think you had some thoughts about where you hope this sort of moment takes us, and what it should sort of focus on, if that's possible.
I have something else to say.
All right.
Because I have enormous respect for the Occupy movement and what you just said about transformation. So I want to talk a little bit about history and also about theory. So I'm going to read a few paragraphs from a document, then I'll tell you what the document is. We are people of this generation, bred in at least modest comfort, housed now in universities, looking uncomfortably to the world we inherit. Our work is guided by the sense that we may be the last generation in the experiment with living, but we are a minority. The vast majority of our people regard the temporary equilibriums of our society and our world as eternally functional parts. And this is perhaps the outstanding paradox. We ourselves are imbued with urgency, yet the message of our society is that there is no viable alternative to the present. Beneath the reassuring tones of the politicians, beneath the common opinion that America will muddle through, beneath the stagnation of those who have closed their minds to the future, is the pervading feeling that there simply are no alternatives, that our times have witnessed the exhaustion not only of utopias, but of any new departures as well, etc., etc., etc. As a social system, we seek the establishment of a democracy of individual participation governed by two central aims: that the individual share in those social decisions determining the quality and direction of his life, that society be organized to encourage independence in men and women and provide the media for their common participation. In a participatory democracy, the political life would be based on several root principles. One, that decision-making of basic social consequence be carried out by public groupings. Two, that politics be seen positively as the art of collectively creating an acceptable pattern of social relations. Three, that politics has the function of bringing people out of isolation into community, thus being a necessary, though not sufficient, means of finding meaning in personal life, etc., etc., etc. Oh, and that work should involve incentives worthier than money or survival. It should be education. They'll probably have some more to say as the night goes on. Some of the quotations I just heard, I want to make some comments about them, because and ask a couple of questions. You know, Occupy a Park is a tactic. We want May 1st to be the day of the 99%. How do we have fun? Large mobilization. It took 5 years after the Birmingham, they didn't say Birmingham, but that was the bus boycott before the explosion of the civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I never knew Martin Luther King, but I did know Thurgood Marshall, and I hope you know who Thurgood Marshall was. Before he was a Supreme Court justice, he was a lawyer for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, probably one of those very archaic organizations called the NAACP. But also, even further before the Montgomery boycott was the case called Brown versus Board of Education. And that case was overturning a case called Plessy versus Ferguson, which goes back to 1898. I see you're shaking your head. You recognize these cases. Plessy versus Ferguson said separate but equal. And that led to the institutionalization of segregation all throughout the country. Brown versus Board of Education overturned that in a unanimous decision in 1954. And Thurgood Marshall argued that case before the Supreme Court. And in overturning that, the question that I'm going to leave, did this lead to a revolution or a reformation? Are we interested in revolution or are we interested in reformation? So there are three main questions I want to raise. One, what goes around comes around. How do you young people, who are much younger, because I'm of the generation of, I'm hopefully older than I look, and of the generation, I go to the gym, I'm of the generation, I was a younger man, younger than Thurgood Marshall when I met him, and he gave me some instructions. I don't want to wear my bona fides too much on my sleeve, but I was the only white guy in Little Rock with the children the day that they went past Governor Forbes and into Central High School. So I know some of those days from firsthand experience. So my first question is, what goes around comes around. How is this different? How did this program, so elegantly stated here, not come to pass? That's what we have to know. We have to understand not what did happen, but what did not happen. A lot of things did happen. We're not living in a legally segregated society. We're living in a functionally segregated society. We're not living in a legally class society. We're living in a functional, 99% means something, et cetera, et cetera. So how did we get here, and what happened to this, which was made by people like some of you, and et cetera? That's the first question. The second question is maybe more troubling to my colleagues on the panel, because I don't think we're involved in a revolutionary moment. I think we're involved in a reformational moment. And I think it's important to understand the difference. I think there have been revolutions, of course. I think the French Revolution was a revolution. There was a monarchy. People lost their heads. It did lead to Napoleonism, to Napoleon II, restorations, and the aftermath of that continued to play out. But that was truly, truly a revolution. In other words, and it was bloody. And I don't know of any revolution, including the Egyptian one, that is not bloody. The Egyptian revolution is failing. It's not succeeding at the present moment. And it's probably failing because it didn't really replace the system. It does what we are so good at doing, that's replacing the masks and replacing the name cards and getting another generation that's not the same people. It may not be Mubarak, but it's Mubarak-like. It may not have the same exact name to it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a real question. Another actual revolution, again, with a sorry end. That's why it's kind of it's the Russian Revolution, truly. Tsar Nicholas II lost his head. The system was overturned. We had a moment of let's say, socialist, communist utopia in the early 20s. Then, of course, there was the reactionary war, the Reds versus the Whites, and the rise of Stalinism. We had the Chinese Revolution. These are real revolutions close by. Russian, French a while back, Chinese, and Russian even closer. Chinese very, very close. But they are enormously costly in terms of life and also in terms of what we are at. I won't speak for you. What I feel is important, which is in this document, a certain kind of participatory democracy. Yes, Deng Xiaoping and Mao Zedong accomplished a transformation of Chinese society, and I've just come back from Shanghai. But also there were enormous costs, and so that's a question. So revolution, reformation, and the final question is, can we get outside the corporation? In other words, I would say my only theoretical critique of Occupy Wall Street is that you're part of the 1% as well as being part of the 99%. That we are sitting in a room now, which is what is his name? Increase McCotton Mather, who was a Puritan preacher in the 17th century, at the beginning of the colonies in Massachusetts, said, that unborn children, had they not come to Christ, would get the easiest room in hell. They couldn't be saved, he said, because they hadn't come to Christ. Or if they were died in childbirth or died before, they would get the easiest room in hell. We are sitting in the easiest room in hell. And a lot of us sit in this easiest room in hell. And which means that, John Sexton and Dave McLaughlin and Mary Schmidt Campbell and Diana Taylor and Richard Schechner, we're all structurally, to some degree, superior to you, most of you, because I can't get fired from my job. Neither can Diana. The Hemispheric Institute, which is fabulous, of course, has tons of Rockefeller Foundation money, and it has this money, circulates. It doesn't come from nowhere. So I've written, I'm not going to bore you with that too much, about how we cannot, at the present moment, get outside the corporation. Now, if you can find a way to really get outside the corporation, I want to know about it. That doesn't make me hopeless, but I always think that hope has to be founded on a really hard reality and not on sentimentality. And so when I talk about Reformation, what Martin Luther King did, what Thurgood Marshall did, that was a profound Reformation. Why Reformation? Because they went to law. They did not go to the gun. Now, some people did. Malcolm X, before he changed his mind, Huey Newton, some black radicals, and obviously the Weather Underground. We saw them sitting in this room, or a room like this very room, last week. They went to actual revolution, which doesn't fare well in the United States. We did have one in the 18th century. We had a second one that there was a civil war. But aside from that, all the changes in North American society, for better or for worse, have been reformatory or reactionary. The opposite of reform is reaction. Revolution is another category, and I don't like, personally, the use of false rhetoric. I think that raises hopes that we don't have, promises of violence that we're not going to enact, etc. So when I respect what King did, he went to law. Where did he make his most famous speech? At the Lincoln Memorial, looking towards the Washington Monument. This is not a revolutionary stance. This is a reformatory stance. This is a stance that says, live up to what you say you are, and you're not living up to it, you fucking bastards. And now I have a dream. A revolution would be break the obelisk, yes. Destroy the White House, yes. Put in another system, but what system are you going to put in? So those are questions that I think you as young people and me as a slightly older person need to address.
So, Yotam and Nelini, I want to come back to you in a moment and ask you specifically to address some of that. And in particular, what I'm interested in here is sort of Richard's claim that we're in a reformationary moment and not a revolutionary one. Do you agree with that? Do you think they're mutually exclusive, necessarily? And also the claim that we're here with a corporation to stay, sort of, or at least this moment. And is that A, empirically true, do you think? And B, even if that is that necessarily a problem, for the kind of organizing that you're doing? But I want to go to you, and I also kind of want to pivot this a little bit around your work, because I look at what's happening with climate change, for example, and it seems to me that all the sort of paths to reform have failed us, actually. And that unless we are to avoid a really catastrophic climate crisis, something quite radical, I don't know I would say revolutionary, but something quite radical needs to happen.
It could be quite reactionary.
Or reactionary, right? So I don't know if that's exactly where you want to go, but how do you think through these issues as an ecologist?
Thank you. I'd like to say I'm Chaia Heller, and I've been involved for 27 years. I can't believe that, but so I'm hoping I look younger than I am.
Both of us.
I'm turning 50. And I have to say for myself, this is a very freaky deja vu, that I came of age at the time when the Greens, not the Green Party, but the Green Movement was starting. I became part of the radical lesbian, I was part of the radical lesbian feminist movement in the US that was actually a very international movement. We had ties to the international peace movement. I did a lot of work there. I was involved in the left Greens when the Green movement itself became too electorally oriented, and I've been involved very much in the anarchist movement. And I've been very involved in the Institute for Social Ecology, which is in Vermont, and was an institute created in '74, I think I can remember, to really build on the ideas that were started by a man named Murray Bookchin. Has anybody heard of his name? I'm just curious. Okay. I ask because I'm aware of sort of the age, gauge in the room. I've been noticing that that in some Occupy forums, it's really, really interesting, the age of the people in the audience. Often when it's a talk about more theoretical setback questions, it's kind of older folks who show up. And when it's getting out and rowdy and stuff, there's younger folks. And I think that there's something right about that, and something that also could change about that. So I want to say something about this deja vu moment. The Institute for Social Ecology was founded really to deal with the issue that Bookchin noted in the 1960s, really before Gore, in Gore's big mentor, that climate crisis was coming our way. He thought it was 200 years away at that point. When he was dying, now almost 5 years ago, one of the last things he said to me is, "Holy fucking shit, I had no idea it would happen so fast." And if people are aware of what's happening in the world, there really are dramatic changes happening in terms of weather systems. I mean, look at the window, but agricultural systems, access to water, really what we call natural disasters, they're going to get worse and worse and worse, and they won't be evenly distributed. The harm will not be evenly distributed. So in some ways, I'm really interested in sort of talking about ecology in the context of Occupy. One of my students from the Institute for Social Ecology, Brooke Lehman, who some may know, may not know, has been really trying to bring in ecological issues, because at the very end, there's sort of like a war against, sort of against time in a sense, politically and ecologically, and that they're completely intertwined, 100% intertwined. I want to say something that kind of departs a little bit from what some other people have been saying, and I'm going to be really nerdy and use the whiteboard. Is that okay? I like to be visual. That I don't think we're really in a reconstructionist map. I think that what's happening is, in terms of my own deja vu, and I think anybody who's over probably 40, you're probably having a similar deja vu. I think we're seeing a resurgence of leftist activity. Let's just call it that. It's an opening of leftist discussion, debate, mobilization that I haven't seen since the anti-globalization movement. And part of what's really frustrating for me is the complete lack of cultural political memory. I teach at Mount Holyoke College in Western Mass, and I'll be talking to students about the Battle of Seattle, big protests. Who knows about that? A lot of people here are older, and if I ask people, now a lot of folks in Occupy do know about that movement, but a lot of people every day walking down the street, kinds of people, have no idea what that movement was. And anybody who was there, I haven't been there during that movement, it was life-changing for anybody who was there. That's where the phrase, "this is what democracy looks like, this is what democracy looks like," it was the first time in my life, after the Cold War, I saw out on the street signs saying, "fuck capitalism," or even the word capitalism, because we were in such the shadow of the Cold War that people were talking about technology and Western industrial society and Western civilization. Nobody would talk about capitalism. So the C word is back on the map, and that really opens up a space for leftist dialogue that started with the anti-globalization movement. And then we know what happened there. Do we know what happened there?
Got smashed by the Patriot
It got smashed by the Patriot Act, but the Patriot Act was able to be put into place because of GW taking advantage of 9/11. That, I can honestly say that very much negatively impacted the Institute for Social Ecology. We were like on wheels. We were on fire. We were literally turning students away, and I won't tell you where we are now, but we could sure use some money. We're still a very committed group of people, but we literally watched the wind get taken out of our sails. We thought, wow, this is the beginning of a leftist resurgence. This could actually have wheels. This could actually have revolutionary potential. And then we watched not just the Patriot Act, but the whole country go into a period of reaction that we're now coming out of with Occupy. And I can tell you, I was very, very cynical. I remember starting last January on the ISC listservs, people were talking about Adbusters doing this action, and should we get involved? And it sounded a little, I don't know. And then Brooke went and said, "Whoa, you won't believe what's going on down here." And so I've been incredibly, incredibly impressed. So I have to say, in terms of deja vu, it's not a bad deja vu. It's a really, really good deja vu. I actually think what's happening is amazing and exciting, and there's intense revolutionary potential. So what I think is happening is it's a moment of radical resistance. And it's creating a space in which people can really talk and think reflectively about what do we do now. People are able to name the problem pretty more clearly than I've seen in my lifetime. People are able to say capitalism there's something wrong inherently with the system. People are able to say there's something wrong with supranational agencies like the World Trade Organization, or the IMF, World Bank, etc. They're able to say there's something wrong with the way the state is structured. There's even a lot of people, and in my lifetime, this is novel, who are actually anti-statist. This is who aren't necessarily communist or socialist, and maybe not even anarchist. So it's really, there is a new conversation. And the question is, in my mind, which way, I actually call this leftist space that we're in the alter left. I take that word from the altered globalization movement. But I think the altered globalization movement opened up this leftist space for new kinds of conversations about capitalism and state power and supranational agencies that are really fostering a kind of global neoliberalism that we haven't seen before. But the question is, are we going to be really stuck in a moment of resistance? And to be honest, that's where I see OWS right now. That OWS is doing an amazing job, and I want to really underline that 20, 50, 1,000 times. Because if anybody's been active in a social movement, it's exhausting, right? And you know, in the honeymoons, it's literally physically exhausting. And it's demoralizing because there's intermovement conflict and people are jealous of each other and who gets to go to this meeting, who gets to be the top of it. I mean, there's all this conflict and jealousy and you kind of hate each other and people have been sleeping with each other and you're sick of each other. And the honeymoon ends and the media kind of loses its romance with you and you're sort of like stuck holding the bag. And so I really give a lot of credit, to be honest, major credit to all the people who are involved in keeping OWS going and saying, F no, you can say it's over, it ain't over till it's over. And I hope it's not over till it's over, meaning the system that we see. But I think right now, I would say OWS is in a moment of creative resistance, where people are really trying to figure out how do we protest while also create counter institutions and counter sort of forums that give people asylum, spaces to breathe and live in within a society that is impoverishing them, physically killing them, and frightening them, and making them feel safe and demoralized. The other question is, can this movement open this space to create a revolutionary set of organizations? And that's actually what I really believe has to happen, a set of organizations that have revolutionary potential. This country has not had really a major revolution since 1776, right?
Well, Civil War was a major revolution.
It was a major revolution. But we're talking a few hundred years, right? If you talk about revolution in Latin America, people are like, yeah, revolution. If you talk about revolution in many parts of North Africa and the Middle East, people are like, yeah, revolution. You talk about revolution in America, people are like, oh, yeah, it's really good. People we don't have a culture, a political culture that really sees revolution as a possibility. Young people don't really see it because their parents and their grandparents weren't really involved in it. This is not true in Europe even, where people have seen war. This country's not only not seen a war on its land, but certainly not a revolution. So for the United States, it's very hard in this country in particular for people to really think beyond what's given, to imagine a dramatically new society. And I think people in OWS believe we need a dramatically new society. And a revolution, in my mind, is simply a process in which people restructure the political system, and that's the state. And in my mind, if we would eliminate the state and replace it with a confederation of directly democratic communities, and we would have a moral economy where citizens who are not state authorized citizens, but community authorized citizens actually manage the moral economy and manage the direct democracy, and that it's based on a set of principles, here's my little star, of ecology, and I'll go back to that really what's so important, social justice, moral economy, and direct democracy. That this star has to be the core, I think, of any revolutionary movement right now. And it can't just be taking a big soup pot and throwing them in the pot. Well, we're doing our little ecology thing here, and we're doing our little economic thing over here. There has to be a logic about how these different aspects of our principles fit together. And I want to talk just for a moment, and then I'll finish about social justice. One of the things that the New Left and the new social movements got wrong, and I'm writing about this, I'm writing a book about this right now, which is called Which Way for the Ultra Left. One of the things that we got wrong, and I can say this because I lived it and I made this mistake myself personally, is that we got very hung up on single issues like ecology. I was very, very heavily involved in the anti-nuclear movement, which led to the formation of the Green Movement. And we got really very, very identified with identity politics. I was a radical, lesbian, feminist, in some ways separatist. I absolutely did not see myself as being in a revolution with men, or what we would now call male-bodied people. Absolutely not. A friend in the room who's been there with me and did that. And I can say that the limits of those movements, the new social movements, was that they did not have wheels. They could not become revolutionary organizations because they were not holistically integrated. They did not, we were, as radical lesbian feminists, we were not dealing with questions of the state and how to replace the state with the confederation of directly democratic communities. We did not take on the question of moral economy and what would that look like when citizens run an economy. We didn't take on questions of ecology, except as an ecofeminist. I don't actually use the term ecofeminist to describe myself anymore, even though I have a book written that's about ecofeminism. I identify as a feminist who's interested in ecology because ecology is about life and death is not so good. But the social justice piece is that what I love about OWS and why I think this movement does have wheels and revolutionary potential is people are bringing in these questions about identity that are really, really important. Race matters. I don't have to say that to people in this room, but I'm going to say it. Race matters. Queer peoples matter. People's ethnicities matter. People's gender, sex, people's bodies matter. Differently abled bodies, all these identities that we have really, really matter, and because they really affect who can be in the space, who sees themselves in the space and is then pulled to come into the revolutionary space. If you don't have a revolutionary space that has people that look like you in it, that you can't identify with, you're not going to join that revolutionary organization. So social justice and identity politics have to be central to any revolutionary struggle. And I believe OWS is doing an amazing job in addressing these questions, way better than the New Left did. The New Left, sorry. Way better than the new social movements did, like the feminist movement. And even though, I would not be teaching at a women's college gender studies if I didn't have the feminist movement, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to say that I do think there are potential little wheels here for this movement. But I think it needs to move beyond creative resistance to organization building around a set of principles that can really help people define what they're organizing for in the long run. That people have to have a minimum program. This is really, you've heard this right from Trotsky, a transitional program and a maximum program. And I did a seminar. I was very blessed to teach a seminar on social ecology to some OWS organizers. And I was really surprised how little people were familiar with that concept of dual power and the idea of escalating sets of demands and having a very general but principled reconstructive vision. And I was very sort of struck by the absence of that. I don't blame the OWS people. I blame our society for erasing leftist history and making young people reinvent the political wheel again and again and again. It's not anyone's fault, but it's our responsibility to make sure that we don't get our memory erased. So there's not somebody having a deja vu 20 years from now when the next movement might or might not happen.
So thank you. I actually want to come back to Yotam and Nelini though, because I've been down there with you guys on and off, and I know that the question of reform and revolution is not new to you people, and that there have been a lot of discussions starting from before September 17th about where we are on this fulcrum, how to understand those two terms and to develop a political strategy around them. And I know it's not also new to you guys, the idea of building counter-institutions. So can you tell us what those conversations are maybe like with inside Occupy Wall Street, and what your take on that is? Sort of where are we in this moment? What should we aspire to?
First?
No, you got it.
That was a lot. Thank you both. And I want to kind of answer that while kind of addressing some of the stuff that you brought up. The first thing I want to say is I don't think revolution's not an event; it's a process. So that's the first premise. And we have to talk a little bit more about what revolution is in order to answer the question about whether this is a revolutionary moment. I think there are particular moments in a struggle where there are uprisings and takings of power and transformation, and I think there are moments, there are kind of peaks and things like that. But I think we have a tendency in this society, at least, and this is the way history is taught in our schools too, is to focus on those moments and to forget all the stuff that happens before and after it. And that's really the important stuff: is how do you build institutions that need to replace the ones that we're going to knock down, and what happens after you do knock those institutions down. The knocking down, like the smashing of the obelisk, is like is a one-day event, and it's not the most important, but it is. It's a part of the process. I think this question of revolution and reform has been part of the movement's dialogue since its beginning, but it's also been part of every movement's dialogue since its beginning. So this is not a new thing. There are a lot of people who have written about this, and a lot of people who have like destroyed movements over this question, or built movements over this question, or made careers trying to answer the question. You know, it's like we didn't make this dilemma up. So that's one thing to maybe that's depressing because it's not a done question yet, or maybe it's reassuring that this is something that actually comes up. And this is an important question that comes up in movement times. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think it's unfortunate that they're counterposed. I think it's I think that's a mistake. I think revolution is necessary and important. I think that we are up against, that we live in a society that's dominated by really concrete, sophisticated systems of oppression: heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, and authoritarianism. I don't think any of those things stand alone. I don't think that reforms in those categories of social life will fundamentally change those categories of social life. I think it's important to address all of those systems of oppression, not only because when you address those different issues, you fill the room, which I think that is an important thing to add to the question, but that's not the only reason we address those systems of oppression, and it's part of the reason that we face them is because those systems of oppression produce and reproduce and support and bolster each other. None of them can exist without the other. We're not going to live in a liberated society without smashing all of them, and they truly exploit, oppress, and stamp out an enormous, tremendous amount of human potential that we never ever get to see in this society. And so I think that we need revolution to replace to destroy those systems of oppression and create a society that's equitable, participatory, solidaristic, self-managing, ecologically sustainable, and so on. At the same time, we absolutely need reforms because those are the things that A, meet people's needs in reality. So like outside this room, and also whatever, I don't know what this room is made up of, but in our lives, we actually face really concrete expressions of those systems of oppression every day, some people more than others. And I just as a confession, when I was like 17, I thought that we had to oppose all revolutionary moves. I literally thought it would be a good idea to have Bush because then we'd have a revolution. Don't tell anybody. Is that on camera? And that's wrong. That's absurd. I mean, it's absurd for a ton of reasons. One of the reasons it's absurd is because there is no such moment that it gets so bad that people finally rise. That's not true. I mean, there are countries where people eat cakes made of mud. If that's not fucking bad enough for a revolution, I don't know what is. So there's no such thing. There's no dip low enough on its own that produces a magical revolution. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that we need to let it get bad is not only theoretically unsound, but it's incredibly heartless. It is like really a cruel thing for a bunch of people with the tools to change society to say, fuck it, we need to let it get really bad so all the people, like, it's an awful, I think it's an irresponsible thing. But I also think that reform is important not only because it meets people's needs and it helps people survive, but it also gives us the platform on top of which we can make a revolution. And then I think it becomes a question of which reforms do you fight and how do you fight for them. So I think, for example, a really good example of a revolutionary reform or a non-reformist reform, and these are terms that I didn't make up, I think a really good example of that is a shorter workday, or a free CUNY, a university that's tuition free. And the reason that those are important demands or important reforms to fight for is because they allow people to have more time to fight a revolution, to have more time to organize. Right now we have CUNY students who work 2 jobs while they go to school. Of course they're not organizing. That's a really concrete way that winning a certain reform allows you to build the kind of movement that it takes to actually have a meaningful social transformation. And then the question is, how do you fight for those reforms? And I think that there are certain tactics that are really important because they're movement building. When you're out in the streets, you're meeting people, you're seeing the connections between the police and the bankers, between the state and capital, all these things that happen when you're out in the streets. That's an incredibly educational process that builds movements. So the question is not, do we fight for reforms? It's which reforms do we want to focus on, and how do we want to fight for them in the process of building a movement. And I think that this whole thing rests on the premise that we need to build a movement. That movement needs to allow for different people and different groups to have the autonomy to fight for the things they want to fight for while being in solidarity with each other. And it needs to be in the process of a dual power struggle, which Chaia talked about, which is at the same time the creation of the institutions of the world that we want to live in, while fighting and resisting the institutions that dominate our lives now to create space for those things to grow. That's what a dual power struggle is. I think that this movement is the very seed, is in the very beginning of figuring out whether it will be a dual power movement. I think that requires vision. So I think that's absolutely right. I think the squeamishness around vision on the left traditionally is really absurd, and it cuts the legs right out from under us. We have to have an idea of an alternative, or else A, we won't know how we want to struggle, and B, we're not going to have a compelling thing to draw people towards. I spent, and the organization that I'm in, Organization for a Free Society, we spend a lot of time thinking about vision for that reason. We think about what is an alternative to capitalism, really, that we could actually argue for, that we could actually defend, that is compelling, that we could start to build the institutions of right now. What's an alternative to white supremacy? What's an alternative to the state? And et cetera. And I think that's incredibly important. And I also think it's incredibly important. This is the last thing I promise is this question of hope. I think that's part of the reason that I think it's really important to have vision and defend vision, because it's this thing that really makes us think about what could be instead. And that's an incredibly important process to go through. I think this whole movement is an eruption of a kind of outpouring of possibility. I think that's the most important thing that we've won so far, and that's the most important thing that we can say Occupy Wall Street has done well, which is crack a little hole in the narrative that there is no alternative, and kind of puncture a little thing. There's a little bit of light coming through it, and we're starting to look at the other side of what could be in the world that we want, and that is incredibly liberating. I mean, to think, I've been, this is kind of what I do. I don't know what I would do if it wasn't for this. And think about how I spend an enormous amount of time thinking about this stuff, and I very rarely believe that it's possible. Mm-hmm. That's, think about how important it is to think that it's possible. So I think, but I think we have to ground that in the real. So I think that you're right about that. And there's a really great quote about that: optimism of the will and pessimism of the intellect. Yeah, it's going to be a fucking bummer. And it's going to be really hard, and it's going to take a long time, and I'm not going to see all of it. And some people are going to get hurt, because that's what happens when you pose a real threat to the hegemony that we face right now. But I believe that it's possible, and it needs to be possible. There is no alternative. There is no alternative to this alternative. That's the reality. The reality is, if we keep going the way that we're going right now, it's over. So, sorry to end on such an ominous note, but
I want to get to Nelini and then Chaia to you.
Yeah, so I think, for the whole reform question, reforms versus, revolution, I think that's not mutually exclusive. It's kind of the whole terms of violence versus nonviolence, and how we live in a violent world, we live in a reformist society. I think that what it's about is that reform is not the end of the road, is that the goal should be, when you're thinking about these reforms, if healthcare was on the table, if there was healthcare for everyone in this country, there's no way that I'm that's just reformist. I mean, that is going to free people's time. It's going to free up their energy. It's going to free up their funds to actually to organize, as Yotam was saying. But I also think that the thing that we're looking at too, and is that we don't really have a sense of community. We haven't had a sense of community in a really long time, because we have all of these terms that have split us and identified us. The left-right thing, I don't identify as a leftist, or I don't even like that terminology, because right now it's the top and the bottom. The whole message of the 99% has actually opened up the doors, are Republicans the 99%, or are right for people who think in a certain way? But it's because I think a big part of that is through education as well. And that's why, you had said before that people didn't know about dual power. I learned around the summer, but still was involved in movement work because I had to drop out of high school because the system didn't work for me, and get evicted from my home. And I think that as well, like the everyday challenges that people go through, we need to also open up to that people don't always speak the same languages, in our society, and we need to open up and actually be organizers and teach folks to meet folks at where they're at. So I think when we're talking also about this whole, what is revolution, what does that look like, what does this whole thing look like, we also need to see is who are the people in the room, who are the folks that are, and then how are different ways are we actually educating about this and talking about this, because it needs to be in different ways. I use this, it's a Wu-Tang quote, hit 'em up from all sides mentality. That's how you have to do it, and that's how and I think that is, in the way the wheel that is turning. Occupy had started that, where I went back, I hadn't been back to Staten Island in 2 years, and my friends are like, oh man, like we have the 99%. I'm like, wait, what? Folks are, even if they don't get it completely, like we met them at where they're at, and now they're being dragged along and looking at the Twitter and, looking at all this information. So I think that, and to kind of also get back to, sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but kind of also what Richard was saying before, what's different is there's, it's not just the place. I don't feel like it's just the place and time that we're in, but it's all of these systems that have completely own us. Corporations, I agree with you, we are living in a corporate world and how we're changing them, but there are people right now, and that's like not, that is completely different. This whole, it's what was corporatism, change into the word fascism. We're living in, that's a fascist world right now with corporations. It's how do we change that from, how do we change the corporations from being fascist right now, which is what they are. They are people, they're controlling our lives, they're controlling our everything that we're going into right now. And that's how I look at the corporate system right now. And I think that, yeah, when folks say, oh yes, down with corporations and down with capitalism and so on and so forth, I think we need to say those things. I think it's healthy to say, when the beginning of Occupy, when you're facilitating General Assembly, is like, yes, revolution, because you want people to feel like it's possible. Like you were saying, it's such a normal, I was just in Brazil, a revolution is a normal word in Latin America and in Europe, but it isn't. So if you're saying it and getting it into people's minds over and over again, even though, because that is our end goal, and that's at least my end goal, is a true, real revolution. If we keep saying it out there and it keeps getting an expression, then people believe that it's something that they can attain. But if we don't say it, then people are going to still be living in these lives of oh, that's not possible, or it's only possible if I go and get the degree and listen to it in class. We have to get that to a normal again. So that's kind of.
Yeah. Richard, I want to ask you, and I know you want to say something here. If the Occupy Wall Street organizers don't perceive a dichotomy between revolution and reform, and if, which is what I'm hearing, right, and if in fact what Occupy is doing in many ways it has deep reformist potential, like moving your money from banks, stopping foreclosures, things that are completely compatible, right, with a Barack Obama agenda, for example. What is it to you? Why does it bother you that also it is attached to, on some level, a revolutionary ideology for some people?
It doesn't really bother me. What I've heard, I've forgotten your name,
Yotam.
and Yotam say particularly, but everyone say, of course I agree with. I think that the idea of near vision, middle strategy, ultimate goal, I think the movement between the two, yes, I think that's educating me. I think that's excellent. It doesn't bother me. I'm not going to spill academic or theoretical blood about it. We are no longer, nor will we ever again, I think, be in isolation. I think the question is not globalization, yes or no. It's not Tom Friedman, good or bad, flat or, but it's how do we work in a world in which billions of people now feel that they can participate and get a little bit closer to what they when they look at the United States, whatever our problems are, they're looking at something extraordinarily that they want, this kind of material wealth, flexibility, even the kind of democracy we have. In other words, flawed as it is, if you see the movement over the last 50 or 60 years, it is towards a certain kind of pardon the term, electoral democracy. I absolutely agree with you as a utopian ideal, this kind of, I would say, not exactly anarchist, but the dissolution of the state. I see the state as dissolved. It's dissolving. The state is left with its military power and its soapbox rhetorical power. The actual power is corporate. And these corporate, World Trade Organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we are mistaken if we think that were we to vote globally about globalization, about this movement, that it would be, quote, voted down. Because for many hundreds of millions of people, this has opened up a possibility for them. So our reformation or revolution, I don't care about the rhetoric, our change has to take that into account. And also, we are suffering, of course, the workers are suffering. Let's take Detroit. So it has a little bit coming back, but many of those jobs are gone, and probably gone for good. Nor are we going to be able to be just in a technology society with 375 million people. And the way globalization works is a cruel logic. I'd like to get through it, but I'm not exactly sure how to get through it. The cruel logic is wherever the labor is cheapest, the company will move. So it will come back here when we pay lower wages than Brazil. It will come back here when, et cetera, et cetera. It's like it's a dynamic system, a hydraulic dynamic system that I would, so again, I'm not trying to argue against it. I'm trying to say that we live in this complex world, and the world over the past 40 or 50 years, for the majority of the world's people, from their point of view, whether it's true or not, they think they're better off if we think we're worse off. And the crisis now in Europe is a crisis that, hey, we don't want to live the way the Chinese live. We don't want to live the way the Indians live. But the Indians and the Chinese want to live the way the Europeans live. They probably would trade in their lot, a lot of them, to live like Greece, et cetera, and so forth. So this is also a kind of view that we have to take into account. And we cannot change our system by itself. We have to think of it in truly global terms, I think.
But there seems to be the implication there, though, that because, let's say, Chinese peasants moving to Shenzhen, right, want these jobs, that they are by default then good, and that the system of both sort of global corporate finance as well as, let's say, U.S. electoral representative democracy are, just because they're aspirational to some people, is that a good then that the movement, or a movement should center? I mean, what is the...
I want to divorce a little bit good from existent. Yes, if I were to do a good, your program is good. Those 5 stars are good. I'm not so sure, except for the ecological part, that they're accomplishable. The dissolution of the state for local communities, I don't see it happening. So I'm not arguing a moral position so much. I'm arguing, or at least wanting us to pay attention to the position. Now, the people in Shenzhen, yes, they're very exploited, and yes, they come, and yes, because it's hydraulic, it's better than the village they came from. Shanghai, however, is, I can assure you, having been there 3 weeks ago, functions better, is richer than New York City. When I got back to New York City, I said, my God, I'm back in the third world. So that at a certain point, and the Chinese economy, you talk about, I don't know what it is, it's called socialism with Chinese characteristics. At one level, yes, at one level it is very capitalistic. At another level, it's a kind of guided socialism. In other words, the state does own most of the means of production, as Marx wanted the state to own the means of production. And yet there's enormous personal wealth as well. It's a very complex system.
Your concern is more about the scale of forces that are sort of arrayed.
And that we cannot, I guess I'm raising the other question. I'm glad that reform and revolution can happen simultaneously. Great. I want to know what the Occupy movement is in terms of this world movement of which we're part. We're no longer what we were in the Cold War, which was, these two worlds and this, quote, third world. So I'm using India, Brazil, and China as examples that represent almost 3 billion people. There are only 6.5 billion people in the world. And these people may not have the same goals that we have. And how do we collaborate with them? Let's put it that way.
I think that's a great question to get to Chaia for a last word from the panel, and then I know people have questions, so we'll go to you and then open it up.
Thanks. your point is really well taken. This question about
I
Here we
love
go.
you at the whiteboard here.
I know. You probably can't even read it, but it helps me.
Yeah.
You know, it's like scribble for it's acid doodles or something. I think there's, this is something really to think about. I think in terms of not just OWS, but in thinking about sort of global politics. That absolutely, what we're seeing in China and many parts of the world is we're seeing the proliferation of a neoliberal logic across the world. And yes, some people are going to benefit from it. If you're looking through the lens, and there's two different sort of lenses to look at the world in. If you're looking through the lens of an instrumental logic, some people's incomes will go up, some people's standards of living will go up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe some people will be guarded in some ways from ecological collapse. Probably not. So I think there's.
What is your last thing?
I'm going to put the ecological question on a shelf there because
okay.
while people in China are getting happy, some people in China are getting happy about some aspects of neoliberalism. The ecological clock is ticking, and they will feel it, and they're feeling it already. So I just want to put that on the shelf there. But there's really two lenses that you can sort of look out at the world, and one is by looking at through ethical reason. Ethical reason isn't just pie in the sky utopianism. It's literally asking yourself what ought to be, not what is and what can be. It's not looking at the state and saying, well, we haven't had a revolution here in several hundred years, and I don't really think it's really possible to get rid of this state. That's looking at instrumental reason about what can we operationally do. That's not the logic that brings about revolutions. If people took instrumental approaches to social change, Martin Luther King would say it made no sense that you could possibly get rid of apartheid in the United States. You have to take an ethical perspective and say what ought to be. Jim Crow was right that it ought to end. It's right that it ought to end the regime of GW and Bush and the whole mess. That neoliberalism ought to end. And that these are the principles that should be guiding our movement. If we get stuck in figuring out, and some people call possibilism, if we get stuck in thinking about, well, what actually can we do? Or what actually is really possible here, we will become paralyzed and talk about a loss of hope. What I love at the OWS is that there are young people who are saying, this is what's right, this is what's wrong. It's not right that there's people who have no housing. It's not right that there's people who have no access to health care. This is wrong, and they're taking an ethical approach, and that's what I find extremely, extremely inspiring about this movement. And so the question is, can we take an ethical perspective? And my last sort of question, this is a terrible drawing. I actually can draw, but I'm going to do a terrible one. Okay, is that a dog or a horse? I don't know, but I was going to or I'll do these little dog dolls. I was like, I'm into visual. That here's your minimum program, okay? And this question, right now, let's say in New York City, and across the country and across the world, there's a huge issue around who has access to land, who can actually have a parcel of land to farm to make food, and who has access to a place to live if you're living in an urban environment. So that's our single issue here. Now, this single issue becomes dead in the water and becomes a simple reform rather than a revolutionary reform. To me, there's a revolutionary reform with legs, and then there's a dead-end reform. It's a simple revolution. If you say, we're happy, and we feel we've accomplished our goals when we get housing and little teeny weeny parcels of land so people can sustain themselves with enough food to eat. To me, that is not looking through an ethical lens, because if you look through an ethical lens, everybody should have a dignified place to live, not just a little crappy place to squat, but a dignified, safe, secure place to live, and everybody should have enough land to grow their food, etc. So the question is, how do you take your single issue and put it into in a sense, a Trojan horse? Your Trojan horse is basically your set of maximum demands that are utopian, they are ethical, that I believe. I did public speaking for many, many years. When I first started, I'd go into a group of people in the Midwest, in the South, around in New England, and I'd say, if I start talking to these people about revolution and crazy pie in the sky, ethical utopian ideas, they're going to throw me out of the room. I'm going to get hit with fruit, whatever. It never happened, and I can tell you that. And I saw it in Seattle. People know truth when they hear it. People know wrong when they see it. And if enough people in this country get interested in seeing themselves as the people who can actually bring about a new society because it's right, not because it's possible, because it's right, they will get on. But the idea is that people in OWS and in any movement who wants to create a revolutionary situation has to figure out how do you take that single issue and put it in a revolutionary vision package that embodies the revolutionary vision and those stars I have.
I want to ask you a
Yeah.
question, then we'll go to the audience. So, just to push back a little bit on your critique of populism.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it also though important that movements have intermediate victories?
Absolutely.
And if that is the Occupy Wall Street soup kitchen fed 1,000 people today, or that we saved 5 homes from foreclosure,
Absolutely.
right? But aren't those then decisions made within a constraints of possibility and a context of we can get this tomorrow versus we can get this 10 years from now? I mean, isn't that an
I
optic
always
that?
do this, absolutely. I do this, this is sort of people thinking about dialectical reason, and what it means is really thinking about 2 things at the same time, which is things are the way they are, and they're also becoming at the same time, okay? So if you can go like this is the way things are, this is the way they're becoming. Can you do that?
I can't do that.
Try to do that. Because it actually does, it makes your brain do something really interesting. Okay, no, I love this. People are actually doing this. Okay. This is basically saying, this is how things are. People are hungry, they're starving, they have no water in the global south, or they're being inundated with water. That's how things are. That's wrong. And now the other question is, now how do we take those wrongs and say, here's a utopian vision of how it can be right, and how do we convince people that they're the people, and this is the moment to do it. And I believe OWS is that space, that cultural space that's being open to do it. And what would make me sad is if people start to get too invested in the media, because the media will kill you. They will make you a flash in a freaking pan. They will give you a little article in Newsweek or whatever it is and make you feel all happy. I saw it happen in the anti-globalization movement. People got a book contract, and then you are nobody 5 years later. They will layer you, and then you're gone. And I actually I have a book coming out on somebody who that happened to. His name was José Bové. He was a farmer, a French farmer who drove into McDonald's. But I think that OWS has to have the long-term vision. And my last point is about education. That every revolutionary movement is an educational process. That what I feel like really needs to happen is all of us, young and old, have to get together and retain our revolutionary historical literacy. It's been taken from us. We don't know the history of revolutions. We don't know how they worked and how they failed. Go check out Murray Bookchin's The Third Revolution in 4 volumes, or anybody else who's writing about revolutionary history. We need study groups. We need to become the people who are knowledgeable enough to see what is actually not just possible, but ethical and utopian and good, so that we know that people have made achievements in the past. If we don't know what happened behind us, we can't move forward together.
So, Richard, quickly,
Yeah.
I know you wanted to get one last word. Quickly.
I just wanted to say that King, that the freedom movement was both ethical and instrumental, and it was a very simple idea: nonviolent resistance.
No, I mean, but I really think that I think it's not a question. We have to build a mass movement, and I think that has to have space for all sorts of groups to play different roles in that struggle. But I think ultimately, not only for the sake of winning, but also because we're actually trying to transform society, which means also transforming ourselves, and it means building institutions. It's obvious to me that it needs to include, a just preposterous number of people, and we're only at the very, very, very beginning of what might become potentially a popular movement. It's not that yet. So that's a reality we have to face, and that's great. We kind of we were in eruption, and it's still yet to become a movement, I think. As far as the neighborhood question, I don't know how to list all the stuff that's happening, but there's a ton of stuff that's happening in the sense that there are troops of people who literally go door to door and are helping tenants of huge apartment buildings organize their own apartment buildings against landlords. So there are projects like that. There are neighborhood assemblies in about 12 different places around the city where they don't function the same way as a 100-person assembly would at Zuccotti Park. They function in a way that makes sense for the 20 people that are in the room, and they are sometimes people who are just kind of who you know were kind of caught by this bug, but sometimes those are the exact community organizers that you're talking about, who were there doing the work before this even started, who are now becoming part of something much broader. So there's a lot of different examples of the shift into what you're talking about, which is incredibly important. And we have to fight the tendency, although I think I agree, first of all, I think it's really important to set a distinction between Occupy Wall Street or the Occupy movement and the movement in general. Occupy might have a particular role inside of a broader movement. And so I think it's really important to say, okay, Occupy doesn't need to be everything. Maybe Occupy is sort of the tip of the sword. Maybe it's the visionary, sort of fearless, in the streets, like ethical, long-term sort of, I don't know what. But I do think it's really important to resist the temptation to be only a set of moments, and to ground and to actually do the hard work that it takes to ground ourselves in communities, which I think is what you're alluding to, and I think that's right on, and that's, I think, what a lot of people are busy with this winter. That figuring out how to do that and relearning how to do that. There's a really young generation of activists who are like in the trenches here and trying to reach out to the history, to people who participated in these struggles in the past, and also learn from all the things that have happened before that. And so we're on the way, but who knows what that's going to look like and how long it's going to take.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, just briefly, when I think back again, sort of the successes and failures of the left, and when I use the word left, I'm not referring to the Democratic Party. I'll make it really clear. To me, the left is the tradition of people being anti-authoritarian and critiquing capitalism and the state as legitimate institutions, and people opposing white supremacy and hierarchy in all forms. To me, that's the left. And there is actually a body of literature about the left, and it's not just this nebulous thing. There actually is a leftist tradition in the United States. We've been at an all-time low in leftist activity, and now we're seeing an upsurge again, this opening of leftist discussion. The thing when I think about the last several decades of the left in this country, and in general, I think particularly among anarchists, is this question of power has really eluded us. That we're good at resisting and protesting and creating alternatives and alternative infrastructures, and all those are necessary with a capital N, but we're not good at securing what we could call the sufficient condition with an S. The sufficient condition means that we've put all of the necessary pieces in place that allow for the good society to take place. And the question of power is about people having the decision-making power to make policy about things that affect their everyday lives. People in this room, every single person here has been stripped of your political power. The fact people see themselves as voting with their dollars, or they see themselves as consumers and consuming with their dollars. People see themselves in terms of capitalism. They're producers, they're consumers, they're not citizens. They're not people who live somewhere and have power to make decisions like adults about how their lives and their communities and what they're going to look like. The left has been unsuccessful with this. And I just want to put it out there that we can wrest power. It's ours right now. We have to just know it, believe it, feel it. That's what makes for a revolution, when people really get that they can actually govern themselves, and they don't need a state to do it, and they don't need a corporation. And with all due respect, when we say this, people have been saying for a while the state is dwindling. The state is actually out with its teeth, more than ever. I can say I saw it in the anti-globalization movement when Clinton freaking brought out the National Guard, and we've seen the state come pushed back in OWS. I've seen the state a lot. The state absolutely is in bed with capital, but they are happily married, or not, whatever the freak they are. But this question of power has to be the central power and principles. We have to know what our principles are. Again, world economy, direct democracy, ecology, etc. And we have to say, we are the people who could change society. We want decision-making power. We're not asking for it. We're not resisting against it. We're not just trying to create alternatives. Those are all necessary, but we want more. We want power. And we're the people to do it. And this is the generation who's gonna do it. I believe that.
So I'm gonna give Nelini one last word, and then we're gonna break this sort of format, and people can continue talking, because I think that might be more productive. But I just want to say quickly, I just got an email from Inside Republic factories, and the cops just left, and they were told by the mayor not to arrest us for tonight. So that occupation, at least, we know will continue. So that's a good thing. Nelini, last word to you, and then
Sorry.
we'll break.
So I think with the neighborhood model as well, and one kind of also some of this is I was saying. The one of the things that we've been criticized, that this movement has been criticized, and a lot of movements of the past 20 years, is the question of balance of race and gender. When it visually, and also this is, the corporate media played into it, that, it's just a bunch of white, privileged people, and there were, privileged people there, but there were also folks like myself there, and, and so on and so forth, and we all have our privileges. But I think, as well, what I think a lot of the times we don't talk about is the existing institutions of power in communities that are really self-identified in basically like the church, is a structure of power and is very heavily identified, especially in communities of color, with race and with what you are. I mean, even breaking down the church lines in Christianity, where Catholicism is mostly in New York City Hispanic, and Baptist, Christian, has a more African American dominance as well. So there's also those kind of strategic borders, as well as the existing community-based organizations that have been in the neighborhood. Richard said earlier, I work at the Working Families Party, where an independent political party in the state that's made up of community-based organizations and unions. And a lot of times, it's this whole it is a very hefty balance, because these are folks who've been doing it for years, and unions that were involved in a lot of the civil rights struggles, unions that struck and pulled off the general strikes of in the 20s and so on and so forth, and has that long, deep-rooted history. And I think what it is as well is taking those existing institutions and transforming them and shifting them, and as well as building alternatives to what we have right now. Because if one thing, we saw this in East New York, you go into a neighborhood, people are like, whoa, what? The demographics just changed in 2 minutes. And that's what's happening, specifically in a lot of the big cities, is gentrification is happening. We are pushing the communities of color out to the outskirts of the city, and then it's becoming all, like this, I don't know the word, all the same thing. And so it is sort of that kind of how do we go into the communities that have existing work, but it's really about how do we help, and there's a quote that says, if you're here to help me, you're wasting your time, but if you are here because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together.
So thanks to the Yes Lab and NYU for hosting.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to Richard and Chaia and Nelini and Yotam.